I would love to hear what the opposite of colonization is. Because it's not decolonization, right?
My opinion, the opposite of colonization is creation. Do we wait for spaces, places, and people to acknowledge our humanity, or do we move with ownership of our own humanity?
You are touching on so many things here. I'm already wanting to cry. How do we start to engage and build relationships with those who are focused on harm?
I'm Aida Mariam Davis, and my definition of belonging is self-acceptance and self-determination.
I am so incredibly excited to welcome Aida Mariam Davis to the show. Welcome, Aida. It is a pleasure to have you here virtually.
I am so overjoyed to be with you virtually, and I look forward to an in-person soon.
Likewise. You are calling in from where exactly?
Los Angeles. So Southern California.
Amazing. So you are the Chief People Officer of the Sierra Club, and you are the founder of Decolonize Design, a boutique consulting firm. I am so excited to dig into that with you. You have a book. It is arriving in my doorstep very, very soon, which we just talked about. It is called Kindred Creation, Parables and Paradigms for Freedom. I took a big sigh there because I am so excited to read this book, and it is what we desperately need at this moment. You are also the daughter of Ethiopian immigrants as a part of your work in writing this book, and you spent a lot of time thinking about your ancestors, specifically how we tap into the wisdom of ancient Black and Indigenous cultures to create a better, more free world. Wow. This is going to be a conversation for sure. We've spent a lot of time on the show talking about epigenetics, and I'm really excited to hear from Aida around how Black and Indigenous cultures that have been with us in our cellular biology for centuries, millennium, can impact our behavior and our mindset going forward and creating this new world. And how we start to craft systems and design systems that are embracing of everyone. So with that, Aida, again, welcome.
You know, we had a beautiful first conversation around belonging and what the word even means. Like belonging starts with be. It is your very being. And I think sometimes we go places and spaces searching for belonging rather than assuming, right? But like, I belong here. In other words, you don't get belonging, you do belong. Now, the environment and society and political infrastructure may not understand that yet or may not acknowledge it. And yet I still know I belong. And I find that, at least in my work, trying to change hearts and minds and evangelizing a framework called belonging, dignity, justice, and joy. For so long, I would articulate belonging as this thing that your workplace has to give you, the world has to give you, and they should, and yet they haven't. And so do we wait for spaces, places, and people to acknowledge our humanity, or do we move with ownership of our own humanity, to go back to the original definition, and claim it in different spaces? And I think that there's power in that, because we then assert how we want to be interacted with, what we define as our heritage, what we define as a humanity. Essentially, we are self-determined. We determine for ourselves who we are, what are, all the spectrum of our identity, but we get to determine that. And then we're not negotiating our humanity with systems who frankly have never seen us. They've never seen our humanity. So why would I appeal hoping you'll give me belonging? No, I belong.
You are touching on so many things here. I'm already wanting to cry. And then what that sparked in me, Aida, was that belonging is on a spectrum. And how do we start to find where we are in our own selves of that spectrum to then start to embody somatically, viscerally, culturally, ancestrally that dignity that is inside every single cell that has been gifted from our father's lineage and our mother's lineage and the biological epigenetic representations of all of that. So that was a lot. I really just wanted to ask you what Kindred Creations came from, but I'll let you just pick where you'd like to start and respond.
This book was originally entitled Decolonize Design. I was very explicit and unapologetic about this book itself being decolonial. In other words, not using Western, what I define Western as like capitalist and colonial ways of knowing. Their epistemologies are going to be abandoned. I'm going to release that. And I'm going to start using different ways of knowing and being to write this book. Well, as soon as I did that, the title changed. It was like, this title doesn't fit. This doesn't work.
Wow.
Because in African and Indigenous societies, there are creation stories. Everything is about creation, right? It's about bringing something to life, giving something life, not just designing something for practical purpose or use, but to actually give something life. And so I dropped design pretty quickly. And I explained that in the book. There is a design element that is a theme. And that we define our relationships in terms of kinship. Almost all African and Indigenous cultures define relationship by relationships. And we don't define ourselves by the colonization that happened to us or the work to decolonize it. That is not who we are, how we define ourselves. So I released Decolonize, and Kindred felt right. I also love Octavia Butler, who is a Black science fiction writer who wrote one of my favorite books, Parable of the Sower, hence parables. You know, there's like some Easter eggs in the book.
This is great.
And Kindred, the book, is about a young Black woman who gets transported back into the time of enslavement, and she's, sort of in present day, and the dichotomy between living between both worlds, and just remembering the past or not remembering and its implications. It's a powerful book. And so I wanted to bring some of that to the book. But as I started writing it, a visual came to mind. And that visual was of a quilt. And the reason a quilt came to mind is they've always represented so much beauty for me. But I learned about the Gee's Bend quilters in Alabama, and then kind of went down a research hole, if you will, on that, and learned that quilts for generations have been the discarded scraps of cloth brought together to create beauty, warmth, and comfort. But it also was a way for us to tell our stories. Harriet Tubman used them to, help people traverse the Underground Railroad. These quilts are given throughout generations. And so I wanted my book to be the erase, the scraps, the people and the ideas and the things that are not commonplace that we have left as scraps. I'm reclaiming them and stitching them together, hopefully, in a cohesive story for this book. And I believe that they have really created beauty, and that there are hidden messages for Black people, very specifically, that I have written things in a way, used certain, colloquialisms, whatever they might be, to be clear, I'm speaking to you. You know what this means, like a quilt would. And I really wanted to visualize who we are, without using a lot of art.
That's really sweet. It's bringing up tears in my eyes as I listen to you talk, because I am remembering the AIDS quilt in San Francisco, and how that went through all the museums in the last few decades. I'm getting so emotional. I remember actually seeing portions of the AIDS quilt and the scraps of people's lives lost. And I was just at the Cantor Museum at Stanford this weekend, and there was a piece about that exactly. How will you dispose of me when I die?
Or remember me, right?
And well, this particular artwork was that, but yes. And most importantly, remember me, right? And how we are feeding the earth and coming and birthing from the earth, and those stories are in our soil.
Yes.
This is amazing. My brain went immediately to this question, and I would love to hear what the opposite of colonization is. Because it's not decolonization, right? Decolonization is uncolonizing something. So that's not the opposite of it. So if we were to think, and I'm loving how you're talking about this evolution, and what comes to me from a neurobiological lens is, well, one, the concept of emergence. And I think we have an emergent circuit that we are hardwired for, and that emergent circuit drives our passion and our purpose and our aliveness for being alive. But it's also part of who we are in this evolution. Is how do we start to find ourselves? And belonging is that path toward understanding how it is that we emerge toward us.
It's always, I think, ultimately about finding or knowing yourself. And my opinion, the opposite of colonization is creation. And the reason is colonization depends on exploitation, exclusion, extraction, elitism. I'm sure there are other E's, but you get my drift. It thrives off a kind of dynamic where creation is about giving life. It's about creating something that does not currently exist, that is not already here. Colonization says we're just going to keep iterating and reforming our system, and it's going to keep working, and we'll just evolve with people's demands. But it's a way of working and being, I think, that really fundamentally depends on exploitation. And I think creation depends on generosity and offering.
This quote that you share here from civil rights activist Audre Lorde, the master's tools won't fix the master's house. Talk about this. That one I had to sit with that and go, holy shit.
Audre Lorde is my queen and king, to be clear. So my deconstructing this is out of reverence and respect. And still I disagree. The idea that I am even concerned with the master's house. That
just say that louder for the people in the back.
Is an assumption I reject. Your house is in disarray. That sounds like something you got to handle. I'm not concerned with that. Now, the idea that we live in the house together, all that might be true, but imagine a world where you have tools and you have land and you can create your own house. Yes, it is far more laborious. It is, daunting, and you get to create where every room is, every window. Like, you have so much more freedom. And I think, on one hand, freedom scares people, and we should be real about that. That sometimes it is more comfortable to stay in with what is familiar than to create something totally new. But as someone who has birthed programs, experiences, even humans, I do see the power of creation. And having seen roses that grow in concrete, metaphorically, seeing people who defied all kinds of odds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I know that alternatives exist and they can thrive. And one of the things I think about, just to make it tangible for people, is we all want to think about how to create a better society or a better city. We want a better, a different way of organizing our cities. But the stage 0 question needs to be asked, which is, are cities the best way to organize humans? I don't know. But these are the kinds of questions we should be asking. And too often we stay, at a certain level because that's where the questions are being asked instead of asking the questions ourselves.
For sure. There's so much in colonization. The core metric is capitalism, right?
Yep.
So how am I commodifying every aspect of a human being and then stripping away the parts of that human being that lead us toward freedom, whether it's joy, whether it's dignity, whether it's self-embodiment, whether it's self-expression, whether it's belonging, right? You use the word deconstruction, and I want to take us to the problem with DEIB+. And I want to quote you. You say, DEI is a part of the industrial complex. Let's remember, okay, folks, for those watching and listening, sit down because here we go. Let's remember that corporations created DEI, not marginalized groups. I want to start sobbing right here. Corporations created DEI for legal reasons, and at its core, continuing the quote, DEI is rooted in the idea that everyone aspires to be a white, land-owning male.
But you know this in your spirit, in your body. You knew these things. And I think that's the beauty of giving language to it. So many people instantly connect.
That's the whole schematic for success. And in this country, in the Constitution, in pursuit of happiness equates financial success. The more that I can capitalize, the more that I can commodify, the more that I can ascend in a financial ladder, then I will have, quote unquote, succeeded. When the reality is, what's the community that I can build? What's the joy that I can create for myself and others? How can I build relationships that tether and thread and weave, to use your quilt metaphor, larger understandings of who we are, what we need, and where we aspire to go together? Where does community fit in all of this, Aida?
For African and Indigenous cultures, that is our purpose as humans, and really non-humans as well, that we live cooperatively and sustainably in community. What we've been doing to the people and the planet has not been consistent with what I believe is our calling, right? As defined by African and Indigenous cultures. But I think community, when people ask me questions about building a just society and what we can do, and, how, while my life's work has been to create a more just and joyful society, my purpose on this planet, and you said this earlier, is to come alive. That's why I'm here. I'm not here to fix stuff. I'm not here to make things more that is not my purpose. But if it makes me come alive, or it's the thing that gives me energy, great. But I think for a community to thrive is for everyone to find those things that make them come alive. And how can they do that if they're working all the time? How can they do that if they're a commodity themselves, right? How can they do that when they can't question the fundamental ways of being, our interactions? And I think community is at its best when everyone has found their gifts. One really special way of understanding people's gifts that I learned in researching this book was the role of two-spirit people in many Native American and Indigenous cultures. These are people who are very gender fluid, right? And more than that, and this is where it lacks translation, they're seen as like healers, like supernatural, that they offer the community something so much. Their gifts are so abundant and they have so much vision that their unique way of life and understanding the world adds value to the community. Imagine if we looked at people with difference that way. Same with disabled folks. A lot of Native American cultures see them as having amplified other gifts, right? Maybe it's not physical, but there are other gifts that they have that are necessary, that we, and in our culture, in Western, and I'll just speak from the American context, I mean, we're relegating these gifts to, experience compounding harm. That's not community to me. And so I do really heavily rely on our way of life.
Yeah, even there are, as you well know, there are many African cultures that revere those who have bipolar, multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, because they're able to bring forward understandings and visions and clarity and stories that we wouldn't otherwise be able to access.
And we criminalize it in some cases.
We certainly criminalize it in this country for sure. And then we also medicate it in this country as well.
Right.
Let's go back to the DEI comment. How do we find ourselves starting to craft and design something different in organizations? If this was created to mitigate litigation for whatever capacity, how do we need to think differently? What needs to be recreated here, newly created, designed, birthed?
At an individual level, I think everyone needs to tap in to their unique heritage and humanity. And if you have been in America for generations and you're white and you don't think you have any, unique heritage, do more research. I think everybody has unique heritage that they should lead from and that they shouldn't abandon, because the trick of DEI is assimilation. We all need to be the same. We're all supposed to be like, it's not just that we aspire, it's that we create a homogenous group because that's easier to control. So I think at an individual level, we need to find what makes us feel connected to our ancestors, to ourselves, to our culture, our community. At an interpersonal level, I think that there are ways of being and working that invite people to bring their full selves, which will be uncomfortable and may cause, perceived conflict. And I say perceived conflict because, the way I speak as a Black woman may offend a white man of a different generation. Just my very being. The fact that I don't want to wear a suit to work, right? Or whatever, choices I make, right? Because I think we often hear belonging, dignity, justice, and joy. Does it protect everyone? What about white people? What about white supremacists? What about, the whole whatabouts? And I think what we're saying is we need to create a safe space for conversation and conflict. People can disagree and still respect each other. And I think that's really a core tenet of dignity. If you can disagree and still be in relationship. And then I think at an institutional level, there has to be clear community agreements, shared definition, and shared consequences. Because at a certain point, right, we don't allow people to just live in their humanity if their humanity, harms other people. That's not going to work.
Yeah. How do we start to engage and build relationships with those who are focused on harm?
So the first thing I'll say is I do not believe in, if someone has demonstrated that they are repeatedly going to or have harmed someone, they must be separated. We have to have a separate conversation about that, right? If there's in the decolonized design context, we call those lower level, harms. They're still important, but we call them dignity violations. So, you may think touching my hair, you have good intentions because you think my hair is pretty, but you violated my dignity, right? Now, if you do that all the time to everyone, that's a different conversation than the first time. However, I think intentions and impact both have to be accounted for. So whether your intentions were great, honorable and good, I'm telling you the impact. And so whether I want atonement, I want some, as the person who has been impacted, I can dictate, I think, or at least express, here's what would make me feel whole. That you never touch my hair again. Can you make that commitment, right? Whatever it is. I do think we have to give people space to change. Now, I don't think it should come at your humanity's expense. So two things can be true, and that's very delicate because a lot of times people are experimenting, and that happens to be on oppressed folks of color. That's not acceptable. At the same time, how do we want people to learn? And I believe that folks with a lot of privilege and who are part of dominant culture have a lot of things at their disposal. They can get creative. I don't think it's my responsibility to prescribe it, but I can explain to them what my boundaries are, what I will accept or won't, so that I encourage them in their community to grow, learn, read, right? Do what they need to do. But I think that emotional burden of bringing people along, making sure they're transforming, that should not fall on those who are barely, frankly, surviving in the workplace.
100%, for sure. How do you define dignity?
It is your undeniable sacred personhood. It's the thing no one can take away that gives you your humanity.
How do you, given that definition, how do you start to invite people? Because when I hear that definition, what I'm actually hearing is a self-worth, right? A worthiness. Yeah. Like I am worthy to exist. And yet, so many humans struggle with worth. So many. Yeah. And so the curiosity is how, and this is going to sound like a really weird question here, but how do we re-dignify humans who have lost their dignity through the framework of colonization?
Can I just say, while you were talking, when I think about who has lost their dignity, I think of white folks. That is a place where I pity colonizers because their dignity is gone. Whether or not they acknowledge it, it is shot.
Give me talk more about that because you're making a huge claim here. This is a really big claim.
I mean, they've lost touch with parts of their humanity. How can you enslave people for hundreds of years and maintain your dignity? How can you commit genocide and steal an entire country? I mean, dignity, yes, can never be taken away. And so I guess in some ways, right, they'll always have it. I'm not saying that, but I feel most dignified when I'm living my values. I feel most dignified when I am coming alive and doing the things that make me find meaning and feel like what I do matters. Now, maybe for some people, killing, raping, pillaging does that. That I don't know the clinical nature of what that connection might be, but I imagine it's not healthy, right? And I think, when I think of restoring dignity, there was an example here in LA. Manhattan Beach had this section of beach called Bruce's Beach. And it was a Black kind of beach resort community. And it was taken by the city of Manhattan Beach. And then recently, like 2021, 2022, returned to the family. That very return.
Yes, I heard about this.
These kinds of things actually restore your dignity. It helps you make things right. Because in African and indigenous cultures, we are concerned with being in right relationship with our land, with each other, with all the, systems of nature and the cycles of life. We are interested in being in right relationship. I think dignity is connected to that. Being out of right relationship, harming people, violence, right? All of that, you lose touch. You lose touch with your humanity. And I imagine wealth hoarding. also makes you lose that. It's not the same kind of violence, but there's still a kind of, disconnection. And so do those people still have dignity? Yes. Do I think that it's been diminished because of their actions? Yes.
This is reminding me of Jill Nagel's quote where we lose our humanity when we believe the land belongs to us, and we regain our humanity when we realize we belong to the land. And so, but what's coming up for me is feeling a sense, well, I really reluctantly am going to say this word out loud, empowered, right? Because I talk about this a lot around the number one most addictive substance on the planet is power.
Mm-hmm.
And when we need the experience to have power over, that usurps everything. And so in order for me to have the experience of redignification internally, I have to find my power.
Mm-hmm.
Do I not?
Yes. And I appreciate the reluctantly empower, because I don't think anyone can give you power. I think you realize it, or
Exactly.
you find it, or you voice it. Yep. It's within you.
And that shift from moving away from power over to power with, that's the shift I think you're talking about, is I don't need to control other people because I find myself here with me.
Yes, I find joy, fullness, happiness. And I loved the quote you just said about land, which is, we belong to the land. And some of the indigenous communities I studied talk about land being a relative, just like, your cousins or whatever. And that, even that land acknowledgements,
I love that.
what we love to do is actually performative, because the land belongs to itself. So let's return the land to, like, the whole idea of belonging, the whole idea of owning land or it being returned to different people, still is working within that paradigm. What is the paradigm shift that says the land belongs to itself? How do we cultivate? We are committed to stewarding and cultivating it and making sure it is here for generations. That's a different frame of understanding your relationship to the land. And if that is power with, I love that. It could also just be interdependence. I need you, you need me. We have to do this together. We need each other. We're in solidarity. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to think about it, but that maybe power isn't a dynamic that's explicit, or that I have power to do this for you, so I will, and you do this for me. And we understand that both need to exist to move forward. But I think shifting out of the paradigms that have been offered are always good ideas. It's always, a good, even if it's not permanent, it's a good exercise for your mind to rethink what you've accepted for so long.
Totally. I love this so much. Let's bring this back to corporations. Let's start to unpack all of this in corporations. How do I start to think creatively in corporations and using all of the things that you talk about around creativity, around relationship building, around really bringing this understanding around dignity and joy and, in essence, freedom? How do we start to bring all of that when conformity is ubiquitous? I often say that conformity is disguised as belonging in order to control an outcome.
I think it's it's about innovation. I don't think it's much different than that, in that when I think about, what are the ways I can demand or create more spaces that I can be me or my gifts can be shared, I think I either need to get creative or I just need to move in my humanity and accept the consequences. Because to be clear, and I'm speaking from a Black woman, if I come to work, when I come to work and, I speak the way that I do using the, examples and using my own lived experience, that offends people, right? Because it's not the mainstream way of doing things. I'm not doing things that make them feel comfortable. I'm doing things that make me feel comfortable, right? There are consequences for that. People will let you know they don't like that. They will let you know that, it makes them, right? I'm sure you've experienced those kinds of things. And I think we need people to do that, because slowly we are saying, hey, everyone's way of being has space here. We embrace that. So there's a modeling element that disruption, as you know, again, innovation, disruption requires. And then there's being really creative. So an example would be when I think about conflict within our organization or client organizations at Decolonize Design, people cannot get past, and rightfully so, their personal emotions about the conflict. And rather than beg and appeal to folks to understand the other perspective, I've started to use like debate clubs. We're just going to debate these issues. And then I'm going to flip your idea, flip your positions, and I want you to debate it, because there's going to be a level of detachment. Now you're going to think a little bit differently. People are competitive, and we're going to engage with the conflict almost at arm's length. Now I want you to argue and tell me why that would, come off as anti-Black, as a white, now you have to shift for this exercise to work, right? And I found that, and it's an element of play, but it's also primarily, right, like me thinking out of the box. It doesn't always work, right? These things are not fail, proof, but the willingness, and I think all of this is about courage. Will you try something?
I love this so much. My freshman year in college, I was part of the mandatory classes that you had to take was a speech class. And so we had to, in one of the speeches, we had to do like a persuasive speech, right? And I am totally anti-capital punishment. So I'm against the death penalty. And so I thought, okay, let me see if I can try to convince myself about being pro-death penalty. And I got up and I wrote a whole speech on why capital punishment is good. And I delivered it in class and I got an A, which I was very proud of. But it made me, I'm still, by the way, against the death penalty.
Right.
But it really made me think. It really made me like I had to go do the research. I had to like actually find the right arguments. I had to think through a cohesive narrative, and I had to be convincing. I had to persuade people that the death penalty was valuable, even while I absolutely to my core do not believe that. How do we start to invite that way of thinking, Aida?
That level of critical thinking, because while we want to change hearts and minds, we also want people to have flexible thinking. Because again, getting out of binary thinking, getting out the mechanical ways of being allows us to live more freely for everyone. And if you think about it, everywhere we go, from the age we enter school, we are discouraged from creative and critical thinking.
100%.
It's defiant. You have to be defiant at a very young age and be consistent. And I'm saying, to sort of arrive there today, another, alternative is to keep creating what so many in the LGBTQIA community have offered us is multiple ways of being, like was not available to me when I was growing up. The many different ways of expressing just was not even an idea. And now I have language, I have frameworks, I have, ways of thinking. And I think the more we can produce that, we're sowing seeds. We won't see it necessarily for ourselves, but there will be children who are changed by it.
Trans means across transcommunication, transcontinental, transatlantic.
Right.
It just means across. It means outside the binary. It means beyond what can possibly be and what is currently understood as. That's what trans is all about. Transverse is a beautiful word that means situated or across something, right? So we can move beyond and into something else. And this is what you're talking about, is moving into a state of trans and really stepping out of the binary in order to create something new. You said that you had birthed humans.
Some of my proudest accomplishments.
How do you hope that they are afforded freedom to think creatively?
I think a lot of parents spend time preparing their kids to enter the world as it is. I don't want them to be ready for today's dumpster fire. I'm sorry. I just don't. I don't want them to think this is normal. This is right. This is what they see around them. This is all not normal, right? You drive through LA, you see people living outside next to, $1 billion homes or billionaire. Like, this is not the world as it should be. And yet, right? We still go to school. We still, know our neighbor. There's things that we still just need to do so that are separate. And I want them to be just nurtured and nourished for the world as it should be.
Aida, this has been an incredible conversation. I thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to share your beautiful, phenomenal, brilliant thoughts and your gorgeous book that I am beyond elated to read. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much, and I look forward to staying in touch.